The hegemony's long-range scout vessel. Inevitable truth drifted silently through the outer rim of what the star charts designated as Sector 7749 Gamma, a region so unremarkable that most civilized species had written it off as empty space. Centuries ago, Commander Chuneth of the Zilithian Empire stood before the vessel's primary viewing port, his forearms clasped behind his back as he watched the scanners sweep out across yet another barren system. "Sir," called Navigator Vexthera from her station, her crystalline voice carrying the typical melodic tones of her species. "We're detecting something unusual in the third system. Electromagnetic signatures suggest primitive technology." Chuneth's head tentacles twitched with mild interest. In his 3 centuries of service to the galactic hegemony, he had catalogued dozens of pre-spaceflight civilizations. Most were observed, classified, and left to develop naturally according to the non-interference protocols. The galaxy had little use for primitives who still relied on chemical propulsion and radio waves. "Analysis?" he asked, moving to the tactical display where holographic representations of 9 small worlds orbited a yellow star. "Third planet from the star, sir. The inhabitants call themselves humans according to our linguistic algorithms. They've achieved basic orbital flight capability, nothing more sophisticated than nuclear fusion for power generation. Estimated technological development suggests they're at least 5 centuries away from faster-than-light travel." Chuneth studied the readings with growing amusement. The humans had managed to split their homeworld into competing nation-states, fought wars with projectile weapons, and had barely begun to explore their own solar system. Their ships were crude metal constructs that relied on controlled explosions for propulsion. It was almost endearing in its primitive simplicity. "Any signs of psionic development?" he inquired, though he already suspected the answer. "Negative, sir. No telepathic or telekinetic capabilities detected. They appear to rely entirely on vocal communication and physical manipulation of their environment. Quite remarkable, really. I've never seen a sapient species develop this far without at least rudimentary mind-touch abilities." The commander's translator device rendered his laugh as a sound the humans might recognize as chittering. "File the standard report with the Hegemony Council. Another backwater world populated by evolutionary dead-ends. Mark their system as off-limits for resource extraction until they achieve interstellar capability or extinction, whichever comes first." As the inevitable truth prepared to continue its survey mission, none aboard could have predicted that they had just encountered the species that would, within mere decades, reshape the entire galactic order. The humans of Earth continued their daily lives, unaware that they had been observed, catalogued, and dismissed as irrelevant by beings who commanded fleets capable of cracking planets. In the depths of space, other forces were already in motion. The Zephyrian Collective had been monitoring border fluctuations near the Andorian trade routes. The Crystalline Dominion was expanding its influence through the outer spiral arms. The various member worlds of the hegemony continued their complex dance of politics, trade, and carefully managed conflicts that had maintained galactic stability for over 2 millennia. But on a small blue world orbiting an ordinary yellow star, a young woman named Kaylin Voss was staring up at the night sky from her observatory in the mountains of what her people called Colorado. She had dedicated her life to the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, scanning radio frequencies and analyzing data patterns that her colleagues often dismissed as cosmic background noise. Tonight was different. Tonight, her equipment had detected something extraordinary, a burst of coherent signals that had lasted exactly 4.7 seconds before vanishing completely. The signals were too complex to be natural phenomena, too structured to be random. As she ran the data through her analysis programs again and again, one conclusion became inescapable: they were not alone. What Kaylin didn't know was that her detection equipment had managed to capture a fragment of the inevitable truth scanner sweep, a technological impossibility according to every known law of physics. Her equipment should have been centuries too primitive to detect hegemony technology, yet somehow it had. This impossibility would soon cascade into consequences that would echo across the galaxy. 5 years after the initial survey, the humans had done something that made the Hegemony Council's collective consciousness stir with unease. They had achieved faster-than-light travel. "Impossible," declared Overlord Nexus 7 of the Zephyrian Collective, his mechanical voice echoing through the council chamber on Galactic Station Prime. Our projections indicated they required 5 centuries minimum to develop spatial displacement technology. They were using chemical rockets 5 solar cycles ago. Vexthera, now promoted to intelligence coordinator, manipulated the holographic display to show the humans' crude but functional FTL drive. The technology is unusual, Overlord. They've somehow bypassed the standard progression through electromagnetic manipulation and quantum fold dynamics. Instead, they appear to have stumbled upon a brute force approach that shouldn't theoretically work. Chunath studied the data with growing concern. The human vessel, they called it the UES Horizon, had achieved faster-than-light travel by creating what their scientists termed an alcubierre bubble. Rather than folding space as every civilized species had learned to do, the humans had found a way to compress space in front of their ships and expand it behind them, riding the wave of spatial distortion like surfers on an ocean wave. It's barbarically simple, admitted Counselor Zyth the Ethereal Assembly. And therein lies the problem. Their energy requirements are astronomical compared to our fold drives, but they've solved that by somehow tapping directly into zero-point energy fluctuations. They're essentially borrowing power from the quantum vacuum itself. The implications sent ripples of unease through the assembled representatives. Zero-point energy extraction was considered a theoretical impossibility. Every major species had explored the concept during their technological development and abandoned it as unfeasible. The energy requirements to create the necessary quantum resonance cascade were beyond the output capabilities of any known power source. How? Asked Nexus 7 bluntly. We're uncertain, Vexthera admitted, her crystalline form shifting to deeper blue hues that indicated confusion among her species. Their methodology appears to rely on what they call nuclear fusion, but scaled up to levels that should result in stellar collapse. Somehow, they've learned to contain and direct these reactions using magnetic fields of impossible strength. On Earth, Kaylin Voss had become something quite different from the radio astronomer she'd been 5 years earlier. Now director of the Terrestrial Defense Initiative, she stood in the command center of humanity's first orbital defense platform, watching as the UES Horizon returned from mankind's first interstellar journey. The mission had been intended as a simple reconnaissance flight to Proxima Centauri, but Commander Rylan Kess had returned with disturbing news. The crew had detected artificial structures in 17 different star systems during their journey, massive installations that dwarfed anything humanity had imagined possible. We're not alone, Rylan reported as his image flickered on the communication screen, and we're not welcome. I detected at least 3 different scanning attempts during our return journey. Someone knows we're here now. Kaylin felt a chill run down her spine despite the warm recycled air of the command center. Humanity had always assumed that first contact would be a momentous, celebratory occasion. They had never considered that they might be seen as intruders in an already occupied galaxy. Recommendations, Commander, she asked. Accelerate the defensive preparations. Whatever's out there has technology that makes ours look like stone tools, but they haven't made direct contact yet. That suggests either they're being cautious, or they don't consider us worth their immediate attention. Or they're planning something, added Dr. Zara Thorne, the project's chief xenobiologist, from her position at the analysis station. If intelligent life is as common as the evidence suggests, there must be established protocols for dealing with emerging civilizations. The question is whether those protocols are friendly or hostile. In the depths of space, the hegemony's military commanders were asking themselves the same question. The humans had accomplished in 5 years what had taken the youngest hegemony member species nearly a century. This kind of rapid technological advancement was unprecedented and deeply troubling. Recommendation? Asked Overlord Nexus 7. Continued observation, replied Chunath after a long pause. They may have achieved FTL capability, but they still lack any form of defensive technology. A single heavy cruiser could sterilize their homeworld within hours. But even as he spoke the words, Chunath felt a strange unease. Something about these humans defied conventional understanding, and in a galaxy where conventional understanding had maintained order for millennia, that defiance was perhaps the most dangerous thing of all. The attack came without warning on a Tuesday morning, Earth Standard Time. Kaylin Voss was reviewing supply manifests for the Mars Colony project when every alarm in the Terrestrial Defense Initiative headquarters began screaming simultaneously. Director! The voice belonged to Lieutenant Zara Thorne, now serving as senior tactical analyst. "We have multiple contacts dropping out of FTL at the edge of the solar system. Configuration unknown, but they're massive." Kaylin reached her command station in seconds, her fingers dancing across the holographic displays as she absorbed the incoming data. 7 vessels, each one dwarfing humanity's largest space stations, had materialized beyond the orbit of Neptune. Their sleek, predatory design spoke of technologies humanity barely comprehended and purposes that seemed unmistakably hostile. "Time to Earth intercept?" she asked, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "At current approach speed, 16 hours, replied Commander Rylan Kess from his position aboard the UES Defiance, humanity's first purpose-built warship. "But Director, these ships could accelerate to near-light speed if they chose. They're taking their time deliberately." The realization hit Kaylin like a physical blow. This wasn't an invasion, it was an execution. The aliens were approaching slowly to savor humanity's fear, to allow the terror to build before the inevitable end. Aboard the hegemony heavy cruiser Eternal Judgment, Commander Chunath stood before the tactical display showing humanity's pathetic defensive preparations. 3 orbital platforms armed with primitive nuclear weapons, a handful of ships that barely qualified as corvettes, and atmospheric fighters that couldn't even reach escape velocity without external assistance. "This is almost insulting," muttered Subcommander Vextera, her crystalline form pulsing with disdain. "The Council expects us to file a full combat report for this?" "The hegemony's protocols are clear," Chunath replied, though privately he shared her sentiment. "Rapid technological advancement without proper social development creates dangerous variables. These humans achieved FTL travel while their species was still divided into competing nation-states. Such instability cannot be allowed to spread beyond their system." What none of the hegemony officers could have anticipated was that humanity's perceived weakness was about to become their greatest strength. The first indication that something was wrong came when the human defense platforms began moving. Not the slow, predictable orbital adjustments that every species used for defensive positioning, but rapid, erratic maneuvers that seemed to ignore the basic laws of physics. "Analysis," commanded Chunath as his ship's sensors struggled to track the platform's movements. "Unknown, sir. They appear to be using their primitive fusion drives in ways that should tear their structures apart. The acceleration forces they're generating would liquefy any known organic crew." On Earth, Kaylin watched the tactical display with grim satisfaction. Humanity's greatest disadvantage in space combat, their complete lack of inertial dampening technology, had forced human engineers to develop something their alien opponents had never needed: robust, redundant life support systems capable of keeping humans alive under crushing gravitational forces. Every human ship and station was designed to withstand accelerations that would kill most alien species instantly. What the hegemony saw as primitive construction was actually the result of necessity driving innovation in directions no other species had explored. "All ships, execute Pattern Omega," Kaylin commanded. The human fleet, if 12 ships could be called a fleet, scattered in directions that seemed completely random to the hegemony observers. But there was a method to the apparent madness, a tactical doctrine born from humanity's long history of warfare against overwhelming odds. Commander Rylan Kess gritted his teeth as the UES Defiance pulled 17 gravities in a spiraling attack run that brought his ship dangerously close to the lead hegemony cruiser. The alien vessel's weapons tracked him with mechanical precision, but their targeting systems had been designed for opponents who followed predictable flight patterns. "Firing," Rylan announced through gritted teeth. The Defiance's primary weapon wasn't an energy beam or exotic particle stream. It was a simple kinetic impactor, a tungsten rod accelerated to 0.15 C using a series of magnetic coils. The weapon was crude, inefficient, and should have been easily defeated by any modern defensive system. It punched through the Eternal Judgment's shields like they weren't there. Chunath staggered as his ship shuddered under the impact. Damage reports flooded in from across the vessel: hull breaches, power conduits severed, life support failing in 3 sections. The humans had somehow managed to penetrate shields designed to withstand antimatter bombardment using what amounted to a thrown rock. "Impossible," he whispered, but the evidence was undeniable. The humans' primitive kinetic weapons operated on principles so basic that advanced defensive systems simply weren't designed to counter them. It was like using a sword to defeat a laser. The technology was so archaic that modern defenses had no protocols for dealing with it. "Sir," Vexthera called out, her voice tight with something that might have been fear. "We're detecting massive energy buildups from the human homeworld. They appear to be charging some kind of planetary defense system." Chunetha's head tentacles writhed with confusion. "What kind of energy signature?" "Unknown, sir. But the power levels are concerning." On Earth, Dr. Zara Thorne made final adjustments to the weapon that would change the course of galactic history. Buried beneath the Colorado Mountains, the terrestrial mass driver had been humanity's most ambitious engineering project, a magnetic acceleration tunnel that stretched for over 200 kilometers through the planet's crust. "Director," she reported to Kalen, "the TMD is charged and ready. Single shot, but it'll count." The projectile was nothing more than a hollowed-out asteroid filled with fusion warheads, but accelerated through the mass driver, it would impact the hegemony fleet at nearly 1/4 the speed of light. The aliens' advanced sensors would detect it coming, but at that velocity, detection wouldn't matter. In space, humanity's impossible defiance continued as ships that should have been vaporized in the first exchange of fire continued to dart and weave around their massive opponents like wolves harassing a bear. The hegemony's superior technology was being systematically neutralized by tactics so primitive they bordered on the barbaric. And in the depths of space, other powers were beginning to take notice. The destruction of the Hegemony Task Force sent shockwaves through the galactic community that reached far beyond the simple military implications. For the first time in over 2 millennia, a pre-contact species had not only resisted a hegemony enforcement action but had achieved complete victory. Overlord Nexus 7 of the Zephyrian Collective stood in his crystalline command chamber aboard the mobile fortress Inevitable Logic, studying the fragmentary records transmitted by the Eternal Judgment before its destruction. The data painted a picture that challenged every assumption the galaxy's major powers had made about warfare, technology, and the natural order of species development. "They use kinetic weapons," he stated, his mechanical voice carrying overtones of disbelief. "Actual projectile weapons against shielded vessels. The effectiveness ratio defies computational analysis," replied his chief tactical advisor, a hybrid AI consciousness known as Synthesis Prime. "Our wargame simulations suggest that kinetic weapons should have achieved zero penetration against modern defensive systems." "Then our simulations are wrong," Nexus 7 concluded with the brutal logic that characterized his species. Question: how many other conventional assumptions are equally flawed? The same question was being asked across dozens of worlds as the news spread through official and unofficial channels. In the Council Chamber of Galactic Station Prime, emergency sessions had been running continuously for 3 standard days as representatives from the major powers struggled to comprehend the implications. The humans destroyed 7 heavy cruisers using primitive fusion rockets and magnetic projectile weapons, reported Counselor Zythka, her ethereal form flickering with agitation. "This suggests either a fundamental flaw in our defensive technologies or capabilities we have not previously recognized in primitive species. Or both," added Senator Krelvos of the Andorian Trade Federation, his reptilian features twisted in what his species used to express deep concern. "Our entire galactic security framework assumes that technological advancement follows predictable patterns. If that assumption is false..." The statement hung in the chamber like a physical presence. For over 2,000 years, galactic civilization had been built on the foundation of technological predictability. Species developed telepathic abilities before achieving spaceflight. They mastered energy weapons before discovering faster-than-light travel. They learned to manipulate gravity before developing planetary shields. Humanity had violated every one of these fundamental rules. On Earth, Kalen Voss was dealing with the aftermath of humanity's victory in ways the alien powers could never have anticipated. Rather than celebrating their triumph, the human leadership was planning for the inevitable retaliation with a determination that bordered on obsession. "They'll come back," she stated flatly during the emergency session of the Global Defense Council. "What we faced was a patrol force, not an invasion fleet. We hurt them, but we didn't defeat them." Prime Minister Chen Weilin of the Asian Coalition nodded gravely. "Intelligence estimates suggest the alien force was operating at perhaps 5% of their total military capacity. When they return, it will be with overwhelming force. Then we need to not be here when they arrive," interjected Commander Rylan Kess via holographic projection from the UES Defiance, now serving as humanity's mobile command center. The colonization ships are already under construction. If we can establish hidden colonies and systems they haven't surveyed. Running is not a long-term solution, Dr. Zara Thorne interrupted from her position as head of the newly formed Xenological Warfare Division. We need to understand why our weapons were effective. If we can replicate and improve upon our success. The debate continued for hours, but the decision had already been made. Humanity would do what it had always done when faced with an existential threat. They would adapt, evolve, and find ways to turn their disadvantages into strengths. In the depths of space, other forces were already moving. The Crystalline Dominion had dispatched exploration fleets to investigate the rumors of human settlements beyond their home system. The Void Hunters, a species so mysterious that most galactic powers question their existence, were reportedly conducting deep space reconnaissance missions in sectors that bordered human expansion routes. But perhaps most significantly, several minor species that had been relegated to client state status by the major powers were beginning to ask dangerous questions about their own place in the galactic hierarchy. The humans had demonstrated that technological superiority wasn't absolute, that innovation could trump raw power, and that the established order might not be as stable as everyone believed. These realizations were spreading through the galaxy's underclass like wildfire. On the mining world of Kepler 442b, the insectoid Thrix had begun experimenting with kinetic weapons based on intercepted human transmissions. In the Proxima Centauri system, the aquatic fluid mines were developing new tactics that emphasized maneuverability over firepower. Across dozens of worlds, species that had accepted their subordinate positions for centuries were beginning to wonder if change might be possible. The hegemony's response was swift and brutal. Enforcement fleets were dispatched to 12 systems where signs of human influence had been detected. Entire populations were relocated to secure worlds where their activities could be monitored more closely. The message was clear: the galactic order would be maintained regardless of cost. But containment was becoming impossible. Human exploration ships had already established outposts in over 30 systems, and their rapid colonization efforts meant that each passing month brought new human settlements into existence. More problematically, human technology was spreading through black market channels as traders and smugglers realized the value of weapons that could penetrate modern defenses. Vexthera, now promoted to Director of Strategic Intelligence for the Hegemony, stood before a holographic display showing human expansion patterns. The red dots representing confirmed human presence formed a growing cancer across the galactic map. Containment has failed, she reported to the Emergency Council session. Human settlements now exist in 47 confirmed systems, with another 38 showing evidence of human activity. Their expansion rate exceeds our ability to monitor, much less control. Recommendations? Asked Fleet Admiral Torgon, his massive frame looming over the tactical displays. Total war, Vexthera replied without hesitation. Deploy the full battle fleets. Sterilize every world showing human presence. Accept no surrenders, take no prisoners. Humanity must be completely eliminated before their influence spreads further. The council chamber fell silent as the implications of her recommendations settled over the assembled representatives. Total war had not been declared by the hegemony in over 8 centuries. The resources required would strain even their vast military machine, and the precedent it would set for dealing with other emerging species was troubling. But the alternative, allowing humanity to continue their impossible expansion, was beginning to seem even more dangerous. In the silence, a single question emerged that would define the next phase of the galactic conflict: had the hegemony waited too long to act, or was humanity about to learn why no species had successfully challenged galactic order for over 2 millennia? The answer would reshape the galaxy itself. The hegemony's full battle fleet emerged from faster-than-light space like a plague of metal locusts, their 1,000-ship armada spreading across the Sol system in a formation that spoke of total annihilation. Fleet Admiral Torgon had not come to negotiate or to accept surrender. He had come to ensure that humanity's impossible defiance ended in complete extinction. No survivors, he commanded from the bridge of the dreadnought final arbitration, his words echoing through the communication channels to every ship in the fleet. Every human world, every human ship, every trace of their species must be eradicated. What happened here must serve as an example to any other species considering rebellion against the natural order. But humanity was no longer the primitive species the hegemony had first encountered. 3 months of desperate preparation had transformed human space into something that defied every tactical manual in the Galactic Library. Director Kalen Voss stood in the command center of the mobile fortress Terra's Defiance, a massive structure built from the hollowed-out asteroid series and equipped with humanity's most advanced weapons systems. Around her, dozens of tactical officers coordinated the defense of human space using strategies that would have been considered insane by any civilized military force. "Sir," reported Lieutenant Commander Zara Thorne, her voice tight with concentration, "hegemony forces are deploying in standard siege formation. They're positioning for systematic bombardment of each planet in sequence." "Just as we predicted," Kalen replied, studying the holographic display that showed the massive alien fleet spreading across the solar system like a net. "They're fighting the last war, not this one. Execute Protocol Icarus." What happened next would be debated by military historians for generations. Instead of attempting to defend fixed positions or engage in traditional fleet combat, humanity's forces simply vanished. Ships that had been holding defensive positions around Earth, Mars, and the outer colonies suddenly activated stealth systems that shouldn't have been possible with human technology. One moment the hegemony sensors showed a modest defense fleet, the next moment they showed empty space. "Impossible," Admiral Torgon growled as his tactical officers struggled to relocate the human ships. "No species develops effective stealth technology before mastering faster-than-light travel. Where are they?" The answer came in the form of kinetic strikes from impossible angles. Human ships had not disappeared, they had gone silent, drifting on momentum alone while their crews endured crushing acceleration forces that would have killed any other species. When they finally revealed themselves by firing, they were already inside the hegemony formation. Commander Rylan Kess gritted his teeth against the 17 gravities crushing him into his command chair as the UES Vengeance completed its silent approach to the hegemony flagship. His ship had been drifting for 3 hours, its crew barely conscious from the sustained acceleration, but the payoff was worth the agony. Firing all weapons, he managed to gasp through the crushing pressure. The Vengeance's primary weapon was a scaled-up version of the kinetic impactor that had proven so effective in the first engagement, but human engineers had learned from their initial success. Instead of a single tungsten rod, the ship fired a spread of 12 projectiles, each one programmed to detonate its fusion warhead at a different penetration depth. The final arbitration was designed to withstand the focused fire of an entire enemy fleet. It was not designed to handle 12 fusion explosions occurring simultaneously inside its whole structure. Across the solar system, similar attacks were unfolding as human ships emerged from hiding places that defied logic and possibility. They struck from the shadows of asteroids, from the magnetic fields of gas giants, from the corona of the sun itself. Each attack violated fundamental assumptions about space combat, and each success drove the hegemony forces deeper into confusion and panic. But humanity's greatest surprise was yet to come. Dr. Zara Thorne had spent the 3 months since the first battle working on what she privately called Project Prometheus, an attempt to reverse-engineer the faster-than-light technology they had observed in the wreckage of hegemony ships. The principles were far beyond human understanding, but humans had always excelled at making things work without understanding why. "Director," she reported to Kalen from her position aboard the experimental vessel UES Pandora, "the FTL disruption field is ready for activation." "Confirmed range?" Kalen asked, though she already knew the answer would change everything. 15 light-minutes radius. Any ship attempting to enter or exit FTL space within that range will experience catastrophic drive failure. The implications hit Admiral Torgon's fleet like a tsunami. Suddenly, their greatest advantage, the ability to maneuver at faster-than-light speeds, was gone. They were trapped in normal space with an enemy that specialized in exactly the kind of brutal, close-quarters combat that modern warfare had evolved beyond. "All ships, emergency FTL withdrawal," Torgon commanded, but his orders echoed uselessly through space as ship after ship reported drive failures and system malfunctions. Humanity had done the impossible once again. They had taken the galaxy's most advanced technology and turned it into a weapon against itself. The battle raged for 18 hours, but the outcome was never really in doubt once the hegemony fleet lost its mobility advantage. Human ships, designed for sustained high-acceleration combat, systematically dismantled an enemy force that had been built for entirely different warfare. When the final arbitration finally exploded in a cascade of antimatter fury, taking Admiral Torgon and his entire command staff with it, the remaining hegemony ships found themselves facing a choice between destruction and the unthinkable, surrender to a species they had come to exterminate. But the true significance of the battle was not the military victory. It was the message it sent to every species in the galaxy watching the conflict unfold. The hegemony, the unquestioned masters of galactic civilization for over 2 millennia, had been decisively defeated by a species barely a century removed from chemical rockets. The age of humanity was beginning, whether the galaxy was ready or not. On worlds throughout the spiral arms, oppressed species looked up at the stars and began to wonder if their own impossible dreams of freedom might be possible after all. In the shadows between the stars, ancient powers that had slumbered for eons began to stir, sensing that the old order was cracking and new opportunities were emerging. The surrender came not as a dramatic moment of triumph, but as a slow collapse that rippled across the galaxy over the course of months. One by one, the great powers that had maintained galactic order for millennia began to acknowledge a reality that none of them had thought possible. Humanity was no longer a minor species to be managed, but a force that had fundamentally altered the balance of power. Director Kalen Voss stood in the diplomatic chamber of the newly constructed space station New Geneva, watching as representatives from across the galaxy gathered for what historians would later call the First Galactic Reconciliation. The irony was not lost on her that a species which had been dismissed as primitive savages 5 years earlier was now hosting the most significant diplomatic gathering in recorded history. The terms are generous, admitted Vextera, her crystalline form flickering with hues that indicated deep uncertainty among her people. As the former director of strategic intelligence for the hegemony, her presence at the negotiations represented a profound shift in galactic politics. Perhaps more generous than we deserve. Kalen studied the Zilithian diplomat carefully. In the months since the Battle of Sol, humanity had captured hundreds of hegemony ships and thousands of personnel. The expected treatment for prisoners of war would have been harsh interrogation followed by summary execution, the hegemony's own standard protocol for dealing with rebellious species. Instead, humanity had done something that confused and terrified their former enemies more than any torture could have. They had treated their prisoners with dignity and respect. Generosity has nothing to do with it, Kalen replied. We're not interested in ruling the galaxy through fear. That model has already proven its failures. The negotiations continued for weeks, but the fundamental structure of the agreement had been established from the first day. The hegemony would dissolve its enforcement fleets and abandon its client state system. Member species would be granted genuine autonomy to develop their own technologies and societies. Most significantly, a new governing body would be established, the Galactic Federation, with representation based on contribution rather than military power. But even as the diplomats worked out the details of humanity's vision for galactic governance, other forces were already adapting to the new reality. Commander Rylan Kess stood on the bridge of the UES Prometheus, humanity's first purpose-built exploration vessel, as his crew conducted detailed scans of a system that had been marked as uninhabited on every galactic chart. The readings told a different story. "Sir," reported Lieutenant Zara Thorne, her voice carrying the excitement of discovery, "we're detecting massive artificial structures in the asteroid belt. The energy signatures are unlike anything in our databases." "Age estimate?" Rylan asked, though he suspected the answer would be significant. "Computer analysis suggests these installations are at least 10,000 years old, possibly much older. But sir, they're not inactive. We're detecting low-level power generation and automated manufacturing processes." The discovery of the predecessor sites changed everything once again. As human exploration fleets pushed deeper into previously uncharted regions of the galaxy, they found evidence of an ancient civilization that had achieved technological capabilities that dwarfed even the hegemony at its peak. More troubling, the technology was still active, waiting for something or someone to activate it fully. Dr. Zara Thorne, now serving as director of xenoarchaeological research, stood before a predecessor artifact that defied every scientific principle humanity had discovered. The crystalline structure hummed with energies that their instruments couldn't measure, displaying holographic star charts that showed the galaxy as it had existed millennia before any current species had achieved spaceflight. "The implications are staggering," she reported to the emergency session of the Federation Council. This technology appears to predate every known galactic civilization by thousands of years. More concerning, the artifacts seem to be reacting to human presence in ways they don't respond to other species. The revelation sent shock waves through the galactic community that were even more profound than humanity's military victories. If the predecessors had left behind active technology, and if that technology was somehow keyed to respond to humanity specifically, then the galaxy's newest power might have access to capabilities that could reshape reality itself. But with great power came equally great dangers. On the edges of known space, the Void Hunters began to emerge from the dark regions they had inhabited for centuries. These enigmatic beings had watched the rise and fall of galactic civilizations for eons, never interfering, never making contact. The activation of predecessor technology, however, had triggered protocols they had maintained since the ancient days. The awakening has begun, transmitted their collective consciousness across the quantum void. The inheritors have emerged earlier than predicted. Containment protocols must be implemented before the pattern completes. Humanity had no knowledge of the Void Hunters' existence, much less their intentions. But as human exploration fleets continued to activate predecessor sites across the galaxy, they were unknowingly triggering an ancient countdown that would determine the fate of all sentient life. Director Kaylin Voss felt the weight of her species' impossible success as she reviewed the latest reports from the exploration fleets. In less than a decade, humanity had gone from a species that barely understood its own solar system to the de facto leaders of galactic civilization. They had defeated the greatest military power in known space, established a new form of government that promised equality for all species, and discovered evidence of technologies that could transform the very nature of existence. But she couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something crucial. The galaxy was vast and ancient, and humanity's rapid rise had been almost too easy. As if forces beyond their understanding had been guiding events toward this outcome. In her private quarters aboard New Geneva, Kaylin studied the data from the predecessor sites and tried to ignore the growing certainty that humanity's greatest challenges still lay ahead. They had conquered their enemies through superior tactics and innovative thinking, but the ancient mysteries awakening across the galaxy would require wisdom that their young species might not possess. The stars that had once seemed empty and welcoming now felt full of watching eyes and hidden purposes. Somewhere in the darkness between worlds, powers that had slumbered since before the first galactic civilization were beginning to stir. Humanity had won the war for galactic dominance, but the true test of their species was only beginning. In the depths of space, ancient mechanisms were counting down toward an awakening that would challenge everything they thought they knew about the universe itself. The price of victory, Kaylin realized, might be far higher than anyone had imagined. 50 years had passed since the Battle of Sol, and the galaxy bore little resemblance to the rigid hierarchy that had dominated for millennia. The Galactic Federation had grown from humanity's desperate wartime alliance into a thriving confederation of over 3,000 member species, each contributing their unique strengths to a civilization that spanned entire spiral arms. Director Emeritus Kaylin Voss, now in her 70s but still sharp as the day she first detected alien signals from her Colorado observatory, stood on the observation deck of the memorial station built where the final arbitration had died. The structure served as both a monument to the dead and a reminder of how quickly the impossible could become reality. Grandmother Kaylin called a young voice, and she turned to see her granddaughter approaching with the easy confidence that characterized the generation born after contact. Maya Voschin carried herself with the casual assumption that the galaxy was humanity's home, not just the small blue world where their species had evolved. "The council is ready for your final address," Maya continued, her dark eyes reflecting the starlight streaming through the observation windows. At 19, she was already serving as a junior diplomat in the Federation's most challenging assignment, first contact protocols with the recently discovered ethereal collectives of the Galactic Core. Kaylin nodded, though part of her wished she could delay this moment indefinitely. Today marked her official retirement from public service, the end of an era that had seen humanity transform from a species dismissed as evolutionary dead ends into the galaxy's most influential civilization. The Grand Assembly Hall of Federation Station held representatives from every known sentient species, their diverse forms creating a tapestry of life that would have been unimaginable during the hegemony era. As Kaylin took the podium, she felt the weight of history settling around her like a familiar cloak. 50 years ago, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the translation systems that rendered her words comprehensible to beings whose native communication ranged from crystalline harmonics to quantum probability fluctuations. Humanity looked up at the stars and wondered if we were alone. Today, we know that we never were, and we never will be again. The audience listened in respectful silence as she recounted the journey from those first detected signals to the current era of unprecedented galactic cooperation. But as she spoke, Kaylin's thoughts drifted to the discoveries that had not been shared with the general public, the mysteries that still haunted the galaxy's newest power. The predecessor sites had yielded technologies that transformed human capabilities, but they had also revealed troubling truths. The ancient civilization had not vanished through natural causes or warfare. They had deliberately transcended physical existence, leaving behind their technological legacy as a test for whoever might follow. The Void Hunters, those enigmatic watchers from the galaxy's dark spaces, had finally made contact 3 decades earlier. Their message had been both profound and terrifying. Humanity was not the first species to discover predecessor technology, but they were the first to resist its ultimate temptation. The pattern seeks completion, the Void Hunters had explained through communication methods that bypassed language entirely. Each inheritor species faces the choice: ascend beyond physical form as the predecessors did, or remain bound to matter and energy. Your species is unique, you have the capability for transcendence but refuse to abandon your physical existence. Dr. Zara Thorne, now elderly but still directing humanity's most classified research projects, had spent decades studying the implications. The predecessor technology responded to human consciousness in ways that suggested their species was somehow related to the ancient builders. More troubling, prolonged exposure to the artifacts gradually altered human neural patterns, enhancing cognitive capabilities while slowly disconnecting users from physical reality. The transcendence is voluntary, Zara had reported to the secret committee that oversaw predecessor research. But it's also inevitable if exposure continues indefinitely. We're becoming something more than human, but potentially less than alive. Humanity's response to this discovery had been characteristically stubborn. They refused to choose between advancement and humanity. Instead, they developed protocols that limited exposure to predecessor technology while maximizing its benefits. Humans would use the ancient tools to help other species develop their own technological capabilities, sharing the burden and the risk across the galactic community. This decision had consequences that rippled through the cosmos. The Void Hunters, who had waited eons for a species capable of breaking the cycle of transcendence or stagnation, found themselves witnessing something unprecedented, a civilization that chose to remain deliberately incomplete, accepting limitations in exchange for continued growth and connection. As Kaylin concluded her address, she caught sight of familiar faces in the audience. Vaxtera, now serving as the Federation's Director of Historical Preservation, her crystalline form glowing with contentment that would have been impossible during the hegemony years. Commander Rylan Kess, retired from active service but still consulting on exploration missions that pushed the boundaries of known space. Most poignantly, she saw the empty seat reserved for those who had not lived to see humanity's ultimate triumph. Too many heroes had died in the battles that established the Federation, their names now engraved in monuments across hundreds of worlds. The future belongs to all of us, Kaylin concluded, not because we conquered the galaxy, but because we learned to share it. The stars that once seemed empty are now filled with friends, allies, and partners in the great work of understanding our universe. As the assembly erupted in applause, or its equivalent among species that expressed approval through bioluminescent displays or harmonic resonance, Kaylin felt a profound sense of completion. Humanity had achieved something no other species in galactic history had managed. They had gained supreme power and then deliberately chosen to limit themselves for the greater good. Later, in the quiet of her private quarters, Kaylin stood before a small display showing the current extent of Federation space. The red dots representing human settlements now numbered in the thousands, but they were scattered throughout a galaxy that belonged to everyone. Humanity had conquered the stars not through domination, but through the radical act of sharing their strength with those who needed it most. Her granddaughter found her there as the station rotated into the shadow of the local sun, bringing the deep cosmos into view through the observation windows. "Do you ever regret it?" Maya asked quietly. "Choosing to stay human instead of becoming something more?" Kaylin considered the question that had haunted their species for decades. The predecessor path offered unlimited power, perfect knowledge, existence beyond the constraints of matter and energy. It was a temptation that many humans struggled with daily. I think, Kalen said slowly, that being human is the most important thing we can choose to remain. Everything else, the technology, the power, the knowledge, those are just tools. But our humanity, our connections to each other into the galaxy around us, that's what makes all the tools worth having. In the depths of space, the Void Hunters continued their eternal watch, no longer waiting for humanity to complete the ancient pattern, but curious to see what new patterns a deliberately limited but eternally growing civilization might create. The predecessor artifacts still hummed with ancient power, still offered transcendence to any who chose to accept it. But across the galaxy, memorial halls carried the names of those who had died to ensure that choice remained voluntary. And in the laboratories and exploration ships of 1,000 worlds, beings who might never have dreamed of the stars now worked together to push the boundaries of the possible, guided by the example of a species that had learned the hardest lesson of all, that true strength came not from taking everything you could, but from knowing when you had enough. Humanity had conquered the galaxy, but their greatest victory was learning when to stop conquering and start building something better. In the end, that choice had made all the difference between becoming gods and remaining gloriously, stubbornly, hopefully human. The stars that had once seemed empty now sparkled with the lights of 1,000,000 civilizations, all working together toward a future that none of them could achieve alone. It was not the ending anyone had expected, but it was the ending the galaxy needed. And in the quiet moments between the great achievements and the grand discoveries, it was enough.